New World Order, you underestimated the people. You took a gamble and you lost.
Okay, we don't like this. Okay, well then we're going to do this, and that is just how it's going to be.
Evidence brought to light that there is a corrupt officer, or that officer did shoot that kid on purpose.
I don't care how I look, I don't care how I sound, I don't care what the beat is. I just care the message gets across.
Alright, well, as always, I'll always come across a technical issue of sorts where I get cut off while I'm recording. No big deal. Small bump. I went back, listened to the little rant that I created, made sure that I didn't go too far off topic. I noticed that in the early stage I was talking about how the human creature was a spiritual creature, and how I went into how I could go to any tribe of any sort and I could see spirituality there. That's what I didn't get a chance to touch on. I went off into a completely different tangent about how we are so different from each other and yet so the same. But the human creature is a very spiritual creature. It just about anywhere in the world, it has a form of prayer. We can't deny that. At least that we can't deny. It has a form of prayer. Okay? And then I touched on how, quite literally, it's our generation that is being asked to be the framework of reality. What is it that we classify as reality? I also explained how religion is found everywhere, and I explained how the technology that we face today is quite literally the things of our dreams. All of this is very important to kind of wrap your head around, for only one real reason. If I'm the generation that is supposed to put the lines for what reality is, and yet I have no full understanding of the religious connotations of the world. I don't know what the church on my street is telling me, boys and girls. The standardized spiritual religious truths that the entire world happens to share. Doesn't matter what language you use to talk about it. That's irrelevant. That's moot. Quite literally, I don't care what God it is. Because, well, you're praying to something or somebody. So you are exercising that spiritual connection that the human creature has. So once we get into this spiritual aspect of things, we start to really find a lot of blocks and doors will begin to shut very quickly. You can't ask certain questions without being called some sort of a derogatory term. Not cool, guys. Not cool. Not a good place to A, have ourselves painted in a corner with, or B, it's an even worse place if you have painted yourself in a corner with this kind of information. Okay? So let's be very careful about how we talk about each other's faiths, each other's creeds, not because we're worried about being called racist or anti-Islamic or anti-Christian or anti-Christ or anti-Judaism or anti-Semitic, dare I say it. A lot of these antis, you know what these antis are used for? It's far easier for anybody to call you or me anti-insert word of choice. It's easier for them to do that than to provide a logical, clear, and concise answer. That's our mission. The ability to look at everything around you and then look at the mass informations, such as the social media, the YouTubes, the Twitters, everything, the websites. Do you think TWWRN's king? Come on. We're at the lowest rung of the totem pole you could possibly imagine. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that like what we do. That's not a lie. There's a lot of people that like what we do. You know, it's fuck it. Every now and again, even I start to wonder if my tinfoil hat's been a little bit too tight around my head when I get into certain discussions. But I'm going to play with you on this one. We're going to have fun. We're not going to belittle. We're not going to degrade or destroy any one faith or any one culture, any one creed. I'm going to play a game of connect the dots with you. All right. So, Tin Man and Lucid, they did this huge thing about gods and aliens. That's a huge, huge spiel of theirs that they decided to talk about. And a lot of things that were touched there were really impacting stuff. Sometimes, I know it sounds foolish, but sometimes the question that is raised happens to be the answer to a previous question. Yeah, I walked away with that with more questions than answers. If you have a question, it generally means you understand a percentage of what you've heard or what you were shown. Well, I get all of that, but what about this? All right, well, it's the what about this that I'm going to focus on, because you've obviously already got everything else. It's not rocket science at this point. So, we got God. I'll just use God. It's a rather familiar term. I could say source. I could say all sorts of things. But God has this lasting effect. You know, it's the word. It's the go-to word. So when I say the word God, it's important for you guys to fully understand that I'm referring to the power and the great power and energies that men once called God. Very important to wrap that around your brain. The power and energies that men once called God. Because unfortunately what you and I call God has become a very skewed definition. And in the great spirit of thank God Jesus was born apparently sometime around this time of year, which I'll get into as how that is a fallacy all in its own. But in the spirit of let's be generous with each other, let's also be generous with our information. Now, we all heard of the Council of Nicaea, 300 years after the death of Christ. If you haven't heard about it, look into it. Nifty information. Okay? The Council of Nicaea, long story short, was when the Roman Empire realized that they could have a stronger control through money, politics, and religion. Is that if any one of those three components were to be left idle, any one of those components would be sufficient to destroy the latter two that are left. Don't matter how good your God is, and it doesn't matter how good your politicians are. If there's enough money to buy them all up and make them corrupt, neither of them stand a chance. Again, doesn't matter how good your money system is. Doesn't matter how good your politicians are. If the moral compass, the construct of the moral compass comes from a mildly undesirable source, that the undesirable source does have the power, quite literally, through faith. And I'm not talking the power of faith in the traditional sense. I am telling you that a lot of shit can happen when 2 billion people have faith in something. If you don't have faith for something, you'll fall for anything. If you don't believe in something, you'll fall for anything. So, through faith, the collective consciousness grid of people just believing in something has the power to destroy both economies and governments. And you guys wonder why this information is, for lack of a better word, hard to acquire. It's the most important information that you will ever lay your eyes on. is the religious connotations of the world. Not the 10 different churches that are disagreeing on your block, but where all of the worlds choose to agree, disagree, and agree to disagree. Okay? Some shall agree, when we're talking Christianity. They will agree that Christ is the Son of God. Okay? The Judaism does not believe that Christ was the Son of God. So they disagree. Certain aspects quite heavily. Read the Bible, it gets a little fucked up. But we have Islam. Islam is a perfect example of agree to disagree. Islam will tell you that Jesus is the greatest prophet to ever walk the earth, even better than Muhammad. Muhammad himself will tell you that Isa, in his writings, that Isa is the greatest prophet to walk the earth. But Islam says that he is not the Son of God. Okay? Moses wasn't the son of God, he was a prophet. Abraham wasn't the son of God, he was a prophet. Noah, and I could keep going, all prophets. Very, very logistic, reasonable ideological construct to start piecing it with. It's important to believe that Muslims believe in Jesus. Why is that important to believe? Why is it at all of any relevance that Canada and the United States understands that Islam believes in Christ? Because both the United States and Canada, although we have worked our damnedest for church-state separation, it is not where we want it to be. Not me personally, I don't give a flying fuck. But the people out there that do give flying fucks, it's not where they want it to be. And while the truth of the matter is just this, we are both Christian nations. Do the knowledge, do the research, find out for yourself on what morals that your countries were built on. Now, at that point, we would end up touching into the Masonic context as well. They were the builders of the times. You couldn't have any religion or any church without the Masons. Don't believe me? Go and build a cathedral. Go build Salt Lake City Temple. Go and build any of these beautiful houses of worship that are found all over the world. Mosques, synagogues, don't even care at that point. Doesn't matter what the house of worship is. It's important to notice that there's a house of worship present. If we pay attention to these houses of worship, they all tend to follow a particular set of guidelines. Built with sacred geometry, built on sacred nautical sites. Is there a group of people who know very well about these kinds of informations? Well, that's the foundations of Masonry. Sacred geometry and the use thereof. Not that complex, right? I said it before, a lot of people say that Masonry being the work of the devil, and there can be a lot of anti and a lot of pro found online. But a little nugget of information to kind of throw into your brain. Jesus was a carpenter. Masons build things. Build things quite well. Almost with a touch of divinity, if you wanted to go that far, when you start looking at some of these houses of worship. Jesus used sheep allegories when he was teaching shepherds. Useful. Possible to believe that this carpenter may have used carpentry to teach carpenters and builders. So, before we jump on the bandwagon of hate too quickly, let's be sure to examine. Same thing I've done with Islam. Before we start bombing every Muslim nation in the eastern side of the world, let's find out what they actually teach their children and what they believe. So, what's the nitty-gritties? The nitty-gritties is this. The Christianity and Islam, there's a spot where they actually full on agree. They both say that Christ, the Lord and Savior of the Christian faith, and the Prophet Isa, one and the same, they say that it is him who rises in the last days and leads God's army to the battle of Armageddon. Let that sink in. That means that Islam and Christianity are closer to being siblings than neighbors. And why are we going to listen to a bunch of people on this side of the world tell us about a guy on that side of the world? Have we not learned our lesson? They couldn't tell you the truth about Saddam. They couldn't tell you the truth about Gaddafi. They had to make up bin Laden. We don't even know why the hell Israel has created ISIS and is now attacking a bunch of different places. Oh, I know what it is. See, the anti-Muslim sentiment has been beginning to die down because of movements such as our own, where we refuse to believe that a bunch of Muslim extremists are pulling this off. Because if they were, you would see higher numbers and coordinated attacks. And don't try to scoff and say that I'm talking out of my ass. We're bombing hospitals and schools. We're fucking the shit up that belongs to the UN, guys. If the Muslim culture didn't have a reason to attack us on 9/11, it sure as hell has a reason now. I've said this in the past before as well. I don't believe now that there are terrorists in the world. I'm not an idiot. They can come from all countries, all religious backgrounds. It's look up the definition of terrorism. They exist. But in 2001, they were describing a particular kind of terrorist, and that terrorist didn't exist yet. Oh, it exists now. You look into real, quote-unquote, terrorist organizations, such as the Black Widows. Bunch of Islamic women who've lost their husbands, lost their sons, nephews. A bunch of women that have nothing to lose. And you wondered why they're pissed off. I don't know, but I'd like to believe that if a country was shelling the shit out of my country, and I died, that the women in my life would be a little bit outraged. So much so that even that the women in my life, if left in a situation where they have nothing to lose, they might even act. It's not a far-fetched ideology. Okay? It's really not. But we've touched on Christianity and we've touched on Islam. So let's go into Judaism for the fun of it. Jesus was a Jew. Okay. And he taught his own received him not. Okay, well, and who did he teach? Jesus was a Jew. He taught Jews. And the Jews received him not. Who else is on that part of the world? Say it with me now. The Muslims. The Islamic faith. If Jesus was a Jew, and he taught his own received him not, who did Jesus teach? Islam, as the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, brought it, was brought forward to the earth 500 years after Jesus died. So, until the Prophet Muhammad assembled his people and the religion that we know today as Islam. It'd be fair to say that a lot of the people of that part of the world would have been all constituted as Jewish of some sort. I'm going to catch some flack for this one, I know it. But here's a food for thought. What do Jesus Christ, Hitler, and Alex Jones all have in common? They're all people of Jewish descent that exposed the Jewish acts, the unfavorable acts. We, in the Worldwide Resistance Network, have come to follow suit and use the word Zionism. I think it's the only proper way of truly addressing an issue. Okay? That's the big thing here. It's very important. Jesus was a Jew, taught his own, received him not. Hitler was a Jew, and apparently he did a bunch of shit to them. Alex Jones happens to be of Jewish descent, and yet has no problem speaking of Zionism and its effects and its connections to the New World Order. None of you found that interesting at all? That little tidbit of information? Understanding the religious connotations of the world? Understanding people's faiths? So, is it fair to say that these three, and I almost want to say righteous, but Hitler's in the mix. So you got to be careful with the kinds of words that we choose to use surrounding Hitler. But if Hitler went to war against the Zionists who control the banks, and at his time of entering into power, there was only something like 11% of the banks that were German, if I'm not mistaken. The rest were all, fortunately, Jewish owned. Now, I'm not prepared to say that they were all inappropriately ran. I am prepared to say that there was a strong faction of Zionism to be found there. Deals of 1919, very important to look into. Okay? Where Zionists, the Zionists, and I'll say it again, the Zionists struck a deal and stated that if they would be given Palestine to recreate Israel, that they would guarantee America's entry in the war. 1919, that was decided. Long before Hitler even considered putting anybody in any chambers of any sorts, if that be the truth. You see this? You see where it's going here? Is that if we don't fully understand what that book that everybody doesn't want to read anymore was trying to tell us, we're already done. What if I told you that what I call a Zionist today, the Bible calls Jewish Pharisees? What does that mean? It's the people who were in charge of the religions. Because do you know what the Pharisees figured out? They didn't need the Council of Nicaea. And they didn't need the Romans to help them figure this out. They already knew that religion and money combined together and masqueraded through a form of politics would control the masses. They knew it. That was the era of control that quote-unquote Jesus was getting the world to shake off. Flipping the money changers tables. It's a big thing. chasing them around with whips. You know, like what would Jesus do? You don't want the Worldwide Resistance Network to do what Jesus would do. You don't want it. But he was very good at explaining nonviolent approaches of civil resistance. Because the Pharisees tried to trap him at one point. They tried to get him to start a revolt in which they could actually really nab him bad for that. Like, in essence, inciting a riot, those kinds of charges could have came forward. So they said, are you telling us that we should not pay taxes? In our day and age, we would call that a very politically charged question. And that's what Jesus faced, a politically charged question. A politically charged question delivered to a religious man. These things are not new concepts. What was his answer? He told the people. He asked the people. He didn't say shit. He asked. He didn't tell anybody anything. He said, whose face is on the coin? And one of his followers piped up and said, Caesar. Caesar's face is on the coin. And Christ said, return to Caesar's what is Caesar's. I don't think I have to explain to you that Jesus wrote the ending of the third Zeitgeist movie. And nobody really caught the play. Take it back. Give the money back to the Federal Reserve. Return to Caesar what is Caesar's. Stop applying so much hocus pocus. This is what Islam has been trying to tell us for a long time now. Is that although that book holds the first 5 books of Moses and holds great truths and great values and happens to hold as detailed of an account as people would allow us to see of Christ, it doesn't hold everything. So we got to stop hating each other. Because until we actually open up the books together and take a real strong, hard look, you know, there are miracles in the Quran that I can't explain. For instance, can you explain to me how the Prophet Muhammad understood the stars in such astronomical ways that we're figuring out now? A man in a desert 500 years after Christ died, not a whole lot of time to develop a telescope, boys. Can you explain to me how the Prophet Muhammad understood that the human fetus goes through the physiological mutations of just about every creature on the planet? If you pay attention to what the fetus goes through from point A to point B, we look like just about everything on Earth. We're a pretty cool mashup of everything. Native American proverbs will teach us that too. That man is created from the best attributes of every creature on the planet. And yet we've chosen to elevate ourselves above them. I have no idea. We only have pieces of all of them. But Muhammad knew this 500 years after Christ was dead. That's a fucking noggin scratcher, man. Because that's even less time to develop a microscope. So you see where I'm going with this? We could tout our Bibles